Well, hello everyone, and thank you for coming to our special panel here at the Photo Brigade. This panel is going to be moderated by Andrea Wise with ViewFind. She's the lead photo editor at ViewFind, and we have a bunch of ViewFind contributing photographers who are amazing storytellers here who will tell their stories. So thank you again for coming. Please subscribe to our YouTube page. Thank you to Adorama for letting us host our amazing events here. You can see us on photobrigade.com/live to see all our podcasts and other events. And also, hello to the Facebook world. We are Facebook Living. This is our first panel we're doing on Facebook Live, so hopefully you're all watching. If you have any comments, go ahead, or questions, go ahead and post them, and I'll try to monitor and have them ask if at all possible. So with no further ado, I'm going to pass this over to Andrea, and everyone, welcome to the panel.
Thank you so much, Robert. And yeah, thank you, Adorama, for making this possible. So I'm Andrea Wise. I'm lead photo editor at ViewFind. For those of you who don't know what ViewFind is, we are a new photojournalism startup, and we have an app that is free. It's out in the iTunes store for your iPhone, and it delivers great photojournalism stories by, for the most part, freelance photographers every single day, right to your phone. And we're working on creating different models for photojournalists to get hired and to monetize their work. So I'm thrilled to be able to present just 4 of our really great contributors. And I'm really excited about this group of 4 in particular, because each one of them in different ways approaches their work with a particular level of sensitivity that I think is really critical when you want to do deep, impactful storytelling. So we have Ruddy, we have Dorie Hagler, Michael Santiago, and Jonah Markowitz. So I'm going to start off by just showing a small selection of work by each one of these folks and asking them to talk a little bit about who they are and how they got started in photography and what this project is about. So, Ruddy, you're up first.
Why? My name is Ruddy Roy. I am originally from Jamaica. I live in Brooklyn. I started photography out of the need to not see my work. I was a writer being edited by the editors. And I think it's the same energy that had me jump up on Instagram, because I didn't really appreciate the work of the editor, which is not to call me. So I started to just put the work that I love up on Instagram, and it is a kind of work that I don't go to the MoMA and the Whitney and I see it's not beautiful, but it's for me something that's relevant, something that is important. I shoot with intent. I shoot with a purpose, and most of the people I photograph have a story that I like to capture also on my Instagram feed. It's about poverty, homelessness. It's about trying to be a part of the conversation, and it is hopefully something that I'll do for a long time, until it changes.
Great. Thank you, Ruddy. So Dorie, next up.
So my name is Dorie Hagler, and I've been a photographer for almost 20 years, I guess. And the work that Andrea is showing right now is from an assignment that I did for Tina Brown Live Media. They have a Criminal Justice in America Summit, I guess for the last 2 or 3 years running, at the John Jay School every spring. And Tina Brown got permission to take, before hosting the summit, she wanted to go and see a maximum security prison and also death row. I was not allowed in death row with my camera. I chose actually not to go in at all so that I could just continue shooting, because I was only at the prison for a few hours to make these images. It wasn't the first time I'd been to prison. Hadn't been the first time I'd photographed in prison. And as a result of doing this project, I really started to think about the fact that I'd never been to a woman's prison. And that, I kind of wanted to see a his and hers view. So currently, most of my work is about people seeking the divine. A lot of my personal work is actually about communities and how they seek the divine, but there's this offshoot that has become about criminal justice. And I'm currently teaching a workshop to women ages 18 to 21 at Rikers Island, to the female inmates. And actually, thank you again to Adorama. They've actually supplied all the equipment. And I forgot to say thank you for inviting me on the panel.
Of course, we're glad to have you. So Michael, you're next.
Hello.
And this work is about someone very special in your life.
Yeah, my name is Michael Santiago, and I'm actually a late bloomer to photography. I picked up the camera like 4 or 5 years ago. And with this work, the topic of this talk tonight is about sensitivity in photography. And since this work is very personal to me, I photograph in a sensitive manner. And when I go out and photograph people who aren't my family members, I take that with me. And I wouldn't photograph other people the way I wouldn't photograph my father or my family. My dad has been battling cancer for 16 years. And this project is his life basically after retirement and dealing with cancer and kidney failure. That's it.
We'll come back and talk more about each of these projects in a little bit. So Jonah.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. So my name is Jonah Markowitz. I am a documentary photographer and filmmaker, visual storyteller. And I was invited here to talk about primarily this piece, which is about the life of Tavares Sanders, as he goes from a group home on the south side of Chicago to jail for 6 months, to academic excellence in high school, and then ultimately getting a full scholarship to Connecticut College. And ultimately it's an exploration of what are the true gatekeepers in our society? What are the cultural barriers? What are the academic barriers? What are some of the nuances to institutionalized racism that we aren't talking about in our general national conversation on race?
So with each one of you, you have particular ways of working, and it seems like you choose the way that you're working based on the particular story that you are intending to tell and your intended audience. Ruddy, you work differently if you're intending for Instagram to reach a mass audience. Jonah, you've made some specific choices about how to frame the images of Tavares's project. So can you talk about, and maybe we can start with Jonah, can you talk about how you think about how to approach a specific story, and so that the story is driving the approach?
Sure. I think in all the stories I try to tell, I try to remove myself as much as possible and let the story dictate. And especially with Tavares, I met him. I always do sort of kind of like informal lead interviews before I start photographing a long-term project, so that I can understand from him, in this case, what's going on in his life, what are the major factors. And I let him tell his story, and I basically want to take myself out as much as possible. And so this piece was published in a couple of different places, one of which published it with his captions describing what's going on in the image and describing his own story, and I thought that was one of the most effective ways to tell this story. So I try to take myself out as much as I possibly can. Of course, there are also things that I can see as someone who's not involved in the situation, some pieces of the story that maybe he is feeling but not able to sort of negotiate and explain on his own, and so it's helpful to be a fly on the wall in those circumstances. But I let his story tell itself, basically.
So then, Michael, what about when you can't remove yourself from the story? When you're photographing your father, you're very much a part of that story. how do you negotiate being a son, but also being a documentarian, a photographer?
Well, to be honest, I took myself out of the story about when I first started this up until about 4 years ago. And that's basically when I stopped photographing my dad, because I realized a lot of times I was there and I was with him, but I was there kind of as a photographer, not there as his son. And I realized, like, if you go back to the photograph of him looking at the computer screen, that one right there, that's when I realized that I need to be there for him as a son. This was the moment where we found out that his cancer spread to his lungs, which is why the camera was kind of like in an awkward angle, because I wasn't expecting that. And I realized that day that, like, I need to, while I'm here photographing, I need to realize that my father's going through something that's very personal and very traumatic. And I'm not facing that trauma by having a camera as a barrier between what's going on with him and myself. So that was the moment where I photograph him maybe like once or twice when I'm there. Not as much as I used to before. Before, the camera was always in my face because I was shielding what was going on in his life. And like I said, that moment was the moment when I realized that I need to just put the camera down and just be there.
So using the camera as a shield, as a tool, for one thing. Dorie, that's what you're doing with these women at Rikers, right? What is your intention there, as opposed to photographing and telling the story? You're using photography in a slightly different way.
Yeah, well, I realized, every time I've been to a prison, I'm not allowed to show faces, tattoos. Like, basically, I have to make those people invisible. I have to make them a silhouette, a back of a head, a hand. And when I thought about going to Rikers and the women, I realized, I have another project which is also feeding it too, which is called Me and Eve, where I've been photographing women and doing like microbiographies on Instagram. It's a separate account. But I realized I couldn't do Me and Eve in prison because I can't photograph their faces, I can't say who they are, and I can't even necessarily ask them the one question that I ask every woman, because answering it could put them or the prison system at risk. So I realized the best way that I could use story for inside of a prison and make the people not invisible isn't actually me taking the pictures, but it's teaching the women to take pictures of themselves and each other or of their lives. So I'm using it that way. And I think in terms of the sensitive piece, I made a decision a long time ago to never take anybody's dignity away with my camera, ever. And I've gotten into conflicts with editors who want to run a picture that they know will sell because it's on the front page, but it just wasn't the story, or, anyway, I just feel very strongly. So in many ways, I am a photojournalist, and in many ways, I feel like I'm more of I don't even know necessarily anymore what the difference is between a photojournalist and a documentary photographer, but I know that I will side on the side of the subject always and keeping their dignity versus selling papers or winning prizes.
And Ruddy, you are in particular photographing a group of people who have been historically disenfranchised, who have been ignored by the mainstream media, who in many ways have been really failed by the beautiful power of visual storytelling. So how do you avoid doing that in your work?
Because every image is personal to me. Like a piece of me is in every image. I have two sons, one 11, one 7, that is growing up under the umbrella of what the black image has always been historically. So I think my aim in life, or the images that I produce, is trying to, in a way, build a bridge between me and the other. It's trying to tell a story and to deconstruct and create a new narrative for the black image. So for me, I take every image personally. I refuse to put up an image as what I call it, naked. There's a heavy caption. I introduce it to the person, and we have a conversation. And I want you to see that dialogue between me and the person. At no time at all do I separate myself from the image I believe that person is my uncle, aunt, sister, brother, father, mother. And so I treat each image with the same sensibility.
So the title of this panel is Strategies for Sensitive Visual Storytelling. And I know a lot of people have been Facebook messaging me that they're really excited to hear from all of you about what are some of the strategies that you employ. So how do you work on establishing trust, building rapport? How do you build that really personal relationship so that you can avoid removing someone's dignity, or, you know, in the case of Jonah, where you're trying to not make it your story and let it be Tavares' story? Where do you even begin with that?
I mean, for me, I mean, I'm working in Syracuse right now, and what I do is I just go in to hang out with the people. I don't even take my camera or take pictures. I get to know these people. Like, I go to places like Syracuse right now is dealing with a lot of violence, but you don't hear about the other things that are going on in Syracuse because the reporters don't go there. So I go to the events where the community is out there and they're having fun, they're enjoying themselves, and I get to know these people on an intimate level where they know me by name or by face. So when I see them, they say hello to me. I walk around the streets of Syracuse. Like, you just have to get to know the people who you want to work with and who you're working with. If you don't know them on a personal level, how are you going to photograph them in the way that you would like to see them? You know, if you don't know those people, you're just going to make a general photograph, and you are generalizing who that person is if you don't know them.
I think it also comes down to telling the right story for you as a photographer, and making that choice to tell a story that is important to you in some kind of way that does speak to you. Because I mean, getting to know the people is a product of you feeling passionately about what you're doing, right? I mean, if you are going and telling a story and you're telling it for the wrong reasons, you're telling it because the photos will look good, or you're telling it because you want peak action, or you're telling it because you think a prize will come from it, then you're not gonna connect with the people that you're photographing. So if you're there making work for the right reason, and establishing connections with the people that you're photographing, then I think the rest will kind of fall into place. And it's really kind of the difference between an empathetic situation versus sympathy. If you're really trying to make that connection, and that's your biggest goal, then the rest will kind of sort itself out.
And I think you said the key word right there, empathetic. Like, I feel that as a population as a whole, we have lost a lot of empathy for people. Like, we don't have that. Like, I see people just, you know, Facebook is one of those places where everybody has an opinion. And no matter what the discussion is, I always see a lack of empathy in people's responses to things. And, you know, as storytellers, we can't lose our empathy towards people.
I think I was very fortunate in that my first professional job as a photographer was as a staff photographer for a tiny newspaper in a tiny town, and it was a weekly paper. And the access that I was given into people's homes, into their kitchens, into funerals, into births, into everything was something that I realized, like, that's where the story comes from, you know, being part of it, well, you know, being on the inside. And so that was something that I just kind of came to expect. And I don't know if it's because I trust myself, but other people trust me. And it seems that I'm able to gain access, maybe just because I don't think I'm not going to gain access. I'm not exactly sure why, but I just feel like I've been able to get to places that are hard to get to, but I also know when to put the camera down. Someone tells me, no, you can't photograph that ceremony, or the woman who's, you know, starting to dance, you know, like a chicken in a Santeria ceremony. If anyone in the room, you know, points to me and says no, even if the priest has told me yes, I'm not going to get the community upset, because then the next time I come, you know, no one's going to want me there.
So I want to talk about empathy a little bit more. You guys all mentioned it, but empathy is something that you give as well, right? Empathy is allowing someone else's pain or joy or whatever their experience is into your heart, and then allowing yourself to give energy for that. And that can take a really deep personal toll on you. So how do you guys, maybe Ruddy, you want to start with this, how do you guys sustain the energy and the strength that it takes to continue to tell stories with empathy?
I think on a daily, I wake up with the idea that, you know, I'm not doing this for money. I'm doing this because whatever work I do now, I mean, I would be opening up doors for my two boys. And it goes across whatever story, whether it be gender, sexual orientation, whatever it is. I'm always thinking that anything that I do, it will benefit my two boys down the road. And so, like anything else, you know, you wake up. I mean, I'm sure there are a lot of people who they get up every day for their 9 to 5. I get up every day for this that I'm doing. Whether it is to walk around Bed-Stuy or to take a train and go down to Alabama. The idea is I don't need anybody to, I mean, I don't put my work into competition. It doesn't deserve to be in a competition. Whatever I do, I find the money, I finance these things, and I go out, and I do it because it's personal. And how I get up for it is basically looking forward in the future, knowing that anything that I do now will benefit the next generation. It's as simple as that.
I think that it is hard sometimes. I mean, I've had experiences in the past where I was doing an assignment in Mexico, and I met this woman, was hiking to her house in Mexico, and her husband were essentially indentured servants on a coffee farm, and she had lost 8 children in 8 years. And I came back from that trip, and I was incredibly depressed. You know, and I think that it's hard sometimes where you're, you know, I'm there open-hearted as this woman's telling me her story. I'm not like clicking away and that there's some sort of wall between me and her. You know, I have a child at home, and I'm thinking about how would it feel to lose 8 children, one after the other, and looking at this woman's life and knowing that I get to put all my camera gear in up to my bag and get on the plane and leave, and wondering, am I making a difference? You know, I know sometimes just by being the witness, and I've definitely seen that a little bit with this Me and Eve project, that just being a witness to someone's story and caring and listening to them is something, kind of one person at a time. But I do sometimes question, like, okay, yeah, in order to feed myself, I do have to sell some of this stuff, and am I making a difference? And it's hard. I don't have an answer to how I do it. Sometimes I do it better than other times.
Michael or Jonah? And you don't have to all answer.
Well,
Okay,
in order.
in
All
order.
right.
Let me jump in. I don't know. Is this on?
Yeah.
I don't worry about. I don't have that worry
That's okay.
because I don't think evolution is tomorrow. I don't think evolution is next year or 10 years from now. I know that you and I sit on the backs of stuff that people did 100 years ago. And we have no idea what they were thinking when they did it 100 years ago. But we know that 100 years from now, we've benefited. And we have used their knowledge, their expertise, their wherewithal to build something, even if it's just 2 tiers more. You and I were able to build it just because they did. And so that's why I do. I do because maybe 100 years from now, somebody's going to say, yo,
Check it out.
somebody did this. So let me just build 2 more tiers on this. And so in that, we have made it better.
But even that is hard to, on a daily basis, is hard to keep that, you know, have that sustain your drive.
Yeah, I'm not as
100
patient.
years from now, this work's gonna matter. And I hear you 100%. That's the motivation, that's the drive. But on a daily basis, yeah, sometimes it is hard. I mean, I try to put myself in my place. Also, my work puts myself in my place. I mean, seeing what Tavares has gone through at college, his college experience is so wildly different from my own, and it exposed so many issues of white privilege and just innate systematic differences that was so shocking that has been a motivator to me throughout the whole piece. Because if I can, and listen, I grew up in Brooklyn. I played basketball. Tavares is a big basketball player. We play together all the time. I played ball in college. Half of the team was black. I didn't see what was going on in their lives when I was at school, and to me that was one of the biggest shocks, was that I could be around it and not necessarily see it because maybe they weren't the closest people to me, or for whatever reason I didn't see it, and that was a big shocker. And so to have Tavares' experience, to internalize that, yeah, maybe it does throw shade on the system. It does make it a little bit harder to believe in the system as it stands, but it also can be a motivating factor, and it could be a really strong motivating factor to try and put this work out and have people see it and have people come to, if you come to a quarter of the realization that I did through speaking to him, then then it's doing its job.
Again, I'm going to jump in again. I get that experience, the experience you had with your basketball players. And let me just stretch it out a little. Growing up in the skin, you tend to wake up every day not getting, not being seen, being invisible. And so when you push against the door and it doesn't open, you tend to get used to that. You tend to go, okay, it's not going to open. But through your history, you know that one day it's going to open. And so what you do, and what I've done, is to pile up the work in front of the door. It's become conditioned. It's conditioning for me. I know for a fact that it's going to be open. Martin Luther King might never have, I mean, he dreamed, but he never knew what it would look like. He never knew that an Obama, but he did the work. I just believe that I should just do the work. Just do the work. Just do the work. Just do the work. Because potentially there will be somebody who cracked the door and say, oh shit, work. It's right there. Simple as that.
And it's a real privilege. It's a real privilege to do this work. It really is.
I feel lucky. I do.
So privilege. Privilege is a big thing. And it's something that I think about a lot as, you know, I feel like a huge part of my role as a photo editor is to, in some ways, photo editors can be the gatekeepers for the work that gets made in terms of what gets assigned, and in terms of what gets seen, with making decisions about which images or which photographers' images to put out into the world. And I feel it's part of my responsibility to work to reduce the effect of the imbalance of privilege in the industry, because it does take money and time to make work, and if you can't take care of yourself and finance your life, then you can't make the work. And you know, it scares me to think of one day there being a landscape of only people who can independently finance their work.
That's the industry right now.
Yeah, it's getting there.
So, Michael, you are in grad school right now. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, I mean,
Big
honestly,
topic.
I wouldn't even be in grad school right now had it not been for the Alexia Foundation. I won the Alexia Foundation grant in 2015, and that allowed me to go to grad school. Had it not been for that, I probably would have been working at a car factory in Fresno right now. And even now, like, I'm still trying to figure out how to pay the remainder of my schooling, and I'm gonna figure it out somehow. And you know, luckily I've gotten jobs here and there that have helped me move through, but I wouldn't have done it without help from people, you know. And I mean, the way that I look at it is, when the assignments come, they'll come when it's meant to happen. So I'm not saying, sitting around going, oh my God, I hate that I'm not getting this assignment. I hate that I'm not getting this assignment. But at the same time, I'm happy to see my friends getting these assignments. When I look at the bottom and I recognize names, I mean, that's cool. I'm happy for them. For me, it'll happen when it's meant to happen. And the way that I see it, like, there's no plan B for me. And I've never had a plan B when I decided to go back to school, and I'm sticking to that. And I'm making it happen as it goes.
But I'm also going to challenge you on that, because you didn't just go back to school because you won Alexia. You won Alexia because you did the work. And I actually can pull up a little bit of the project that you won the Alexia student grant for. So do you want to talk a bit about, I don't know why I'm phrasing it like a question, would you please talk a little bit about this project that I might not be able to actually pull up?
So yeah, I was doing a lot of work revolving around healthy eating and food justice in Oakland. And one of the farmers markets that I went to specifically worked with just black farmers, and it amazed me that there was black farmers in California. And I kept hopping around to different farmers markets looking for black farmers. And I remember one time I asked a security guard, and I was like, "Are there any black farmers who are here selling products?" And he just laughed. And that's the reaction that I've always gotten when I started this project, is that people didn't know that there were still black farmers in California. And I found that to be a problem, and I started doing more research on it, of why the reasons behind the lack of black farmers. You know, they've dealt with so much racist policies, getting their lands taken away from them, being murdered. The farmer that was working with Mr. McGill, he had a friend back in, I believe, I want to say Mississippi, who was a hog farmer also. And the farmer next to him wanted his pigs and his land, so he just walked over and killed them and got the pigs, and his wife never got any retribution from that. And that's been happening ever since the whole 40 acres and a mule reconstruction kind of thing, which actually never even happened. Mr. McGill lost his land, about 320 acres in the 80s, and since then he's been trying to kind of just tell the story and get his land back, or get some money for it, and it hasn't happened. And for me, it was always just about getting the story out and making sure that people know what happened to him and what has happened to black farmers throughout time.
Jonah, you're white.
It's true.
And with your work with Tavares, you're photographing someone who is black. Mm-hmm. And in some ways, one of the things I was thinking about with this panel is the idea of who gets to tell other people's stories. And I don't believe that, only black people get to tell black people's stories. But traditionally, it's been white men telling the stories of everyone else. So how do you, in your own work, avoid the tropes that can sometimes come from that?
Sure. I guess it came. I mean, I struggled with that for a while. Was I the right person to tell this story? And in the end, it came down to the fact that it felt more right for me to tell it than for me to ignore it. And I felt like I had something to say here. Tavares had something to say here. This was something that needed to be told. And for me to have made the decision to walk away from that wouldn't have benefited anybody. And maybe and without doubt, there are people who innately understand Tavares' story more than I. But that doesn't mean that I can't let his voice shine through. And it also, there is something to be said for seeing the other side also. I mean, I went through college in a similar experience, in a similar school, in a liberal arts school in the Northeast. And I was well acquainted with the culture that was there. So in some ways I did know what was going on. In other ways I had no idea. And the parts that I had no idea forced me to tell the story, because If I could go through that experience at Skidmore and which is where I went to college, and not understand what kids in Tavares' shoes were going through there, then there's just no way for me to not tell this story. And the rest comes down to respect and understanding our limitations and understanding what we don't understand, or understanding at least that it's possible that there are tons of things that we just don't get, and we have to defer to other people and accept that they know this stuff better than us. And so that's what a lot of it was, giving in to Tavares' story and not trying to control it, not trying to manipulate it, not trying to bring it to a place that I want it to be, or wrap it up with a pretty bow, which is what I'm asked to do all the time when I'm shooting on assignment or I'm shooting on a short deadline thing. So yeah, it was a respect issue, and it felt better for me to tell the story than not, and that makes it sound a little bit like it's on me. But you were asking me why I chose to tell the story, and that's why.
I mean, I got a question for you, since you brought up editors before. How many times when you were showing the work did you get asked, "Where's the guns? Where are the drugs?"
I got, you know what the number one question is, which is kind of telling. I always get asked, how do I know him? How did our paths meet? How did that cross? Which is a pretty telling question, because it's like, that just sort of wraps up exactly why I'm telling this story. Is because it shouldn't be the anomaly that me and Tavares are hanging out, making a story.
But did you get asked that question?
To be honest, I don't think I did.
And the reason why I asked that is because every time with my work and people who I know who are photographers of color, when we're working on these kind of stories, that's the number one thing that they ask for us. Where are the images of them with the guns, with the drugs? How come I don't see them? In order for this story to make it through or look better or catch somebody's eye, we need to see that. And I just find it kind of bizarre that nobody asked you for that.
I'm thankful they didn't.
Well, so you're touching on a really interesting point. Dorie, at the very beginning of this panel, started to say, you can't play scales in with only minor notes, right? Yeah. And then Ruddy said, but what if the song is in the minor key?
Uh-huh.
So...
Well, that came after that trip, you know, when I was, well, actually, maybe it was even a few years ago. You know, I sometimes joke, I don't know what comes first, and maybe I'm wrong, but I always, you know, especially female photographers, I don't know what comes first, the camera or the depressive personality, you know, or the tendency towards depression. And so I think that is, you know, something that I've had to, you know, that I've had to deal with. And so years ago, I realized, you know, I'm just telling pictures and taking pictures of people looking sad. And sometimes maybe they aren't sad, but because maybe I am, I'm showing postures that I like. I like when people look off to the right. I like melancholy. And yeah, it's moody and it's gritty. But I realized, you know, that you can't, that isn't the whole picture, and that I'm actually editing sometimes based on my own emotional musical scale. And so if I'm actually going to document something accurately, if somebody's laughing, I'm not going to cut that picture because they're laughing. I mean, and I make certain editorial decisions, I think, differently than maybe photo editors want me to. I actually don't mind when people are looking at the camera, and I don't mind if it's a serious story, if somebody's laughing, if that's what happened. Does that answer your question? I'm not 100% sure.
Well, it's all very complicated. I don't
Yeah.
think there are clean answers. Ruddy, you seem like you want to add something.
It's huge.
Yeah.
I mean, I think there are pros and cons to who gets to tell the story. I go back and forth, but I go back and forth because of this. I mean, if we're all in here right now, and we go outside to talk about what happened here today, there are different ethnic groups, different nationalities in here, and so who gets to tell the story? That's one way to look at it. If you're going to tell the story, my story, if anybody is going to tell my story, who is best to tell the story? Somebody who's black, somebody who's white, somebody who's Asian, somebody. I mean, it's really hard, but I know that whenever a tourist comes to Jamaica and I'm able to sit down with them, they point out stuff that I never saw. Ari, you know, did you see that? And I'm like, no, that's because I passed it every day. And so there's something that the other brings to a story that I think is important. However, here's where I get into an argument. I remember photographing in Katrina, bringing back my images, and a white editor asked me if I could photograph white people. And at the tip of my tongue was a question like, you know, when you send whoever, white dude in Africa, do you ask them if they can photograph black people? And I think that's where I kind of back away from the idea that, you know, I've been to Jamaica. I mean, and a lot of people, a lot of editors know that I go to Jamaica every summer and I photograph dancehall. And yet I still see white photographers. Nobody's ever asked me to give them dancehall work. Nobody. I've been photographing dancehall for 6-7 years. However, I'll go to Jamaica this summer and I'll see a white photographer there photographing dancehall. Who's been hired, and I know the editor who sent him. And so I look at that as you know, two things I'm going to do. I'm going to keep putting work at the door, like I said, hoping that one day somebody will crack the door open and go, oh, shit, work.
That's awesome.
And it affirms the fact that my story is better accepted coming from the dominant culture, because that's how I see it. And that has been the narrative throughout history. That's the story. I mean, it's okay for white folks to tell our story.
It's also okay for men to tell women's stories.
I mean, we're not, but that's a different conversation. We're talking about color right now. Yeah. That's what we're talking about right now. We're not talking about gender, color. And that's the conversation. Obama recently, if we're going to go political, Obama recently talked about in his instituting LGBT, there's going to be a monument and there's going to be a curriculum. Now, I can tell you that having gone to Virginia recently and walked the 20 miles that Nat Turner took from Cabin Pond to Jerusalem is in no history book. We know nothing about Nat Turner, other than the fact that 2 movies are going to come out know about his life. But I've been here almost 20 years. I've not seen the history books. My son will not know about 80% of his history. And that, to me, recently somebody asked me, what is poverty? And I define poverty as a lack of knowledge of self. Imagine how these kids are growing up. And again, as soon as somebody say black, blah, 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 black, somebody goes woman, 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 LGBT, blah, 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 and so the conversation becomes, okay, let's deal with what's hot. And what's hot right now is LGBT and gender. And so we continue to stay at the bottom, not knowing who we are. That was a mouthful.
No, I hear that. Yeah. Dorie, what do you think about that?
Well, I agree in the sense that it's tangential, the gender thing, but I don't think it's separate. I think that included in people with black skin are black women. And if you count the number of black women's photographs that have been published in the last year, you're not going to find a lot. You're not going to find a lot talking on a panel, and if you do, it's going to be the same 5 or 6, because there just aren't that many people out there. So while I appreciate that you're telling the story of being in black skin, you also can't tell the story of being in a black woman, a woman in black skin. And again, we're talking about we all have to.
Your story is a black story. Your story is a black story. So what gives you the authority to tell a black story?
Nothing. But I'm saying what I'm trying to point out is that it isn't just about there's 50% of the population that are women, and we're treated differently simply because I walk in the room, you walk in the room with your skin, I walk in the room with my body, and I'm treated differently in pretty much every camera store in the United States except this one. Yay, thank you, Adorama. So while I appreciate what you're saying about race, it's exactly the same thing about my experience being a woman.
I have never seen a white woman hung because she said hello to a black dude.
But you've seen women who have been stoned to death because they looked at him.
Not because she said to a black dude. Not because she said hi to a black dude.
Okay. So these are obviously really, really sensitive topics that
Huge.
that
Yep.
that are deeply personal, and that's why we make this work, right?
Boom.
Yep.
Right? Because it's our lived experiences. I mean, I can personally identify with what Dorie's saying much more than I can identify with your experience, because I too have had the experience of, you know, walking into a non-Adorama camera store and being asked, you know, oh, are you looking for like something fun to take some selfies? And I'm like, no, I'm a
Selfie
professional.
stick?
Serious
I
fun.
know how to use this stuff. But that's why we need many different voices telling stories, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, and different ages too. You know, I think it's great that there's so many young people coming up with cameras, but I don't want to see the older people with cameras being kind of pushed out by the young either, because that's a different perspective as well.
Well, and I think also we all see the world differently. We all see the world through the lens of our own personal experiences and the experiences of anybody that we know, that we've cared about, that we've read about, that we've been exposed to. And that does, no matter how much you want to remove yourself from the story, that does influence what you care about, what you pay attention to, what you notice, which, again, is why I think we need to have diversity in gender, in sexual orientation, in race, in age,
But
presenting
conversation,
stories.
it keeps coming up and it keeps happening and happening, but still nothing changes. And
So
I
what do
think
we
I
do?
think that's the problem right there. You know, like we need to implement change. How's it gonna happen? I have no idea. But you know, like I have a friend who says like, oh, you know, we need to stop boycotting these events and stop going to these events because, you know, they don't want us there, or, you know, the lack of people going there. And I'm like, nah, man, like, we need to keep going and show our faces there. You know, like, you've seen me in action calling people out, which is probably why you asked me to sit here. Like, I'm not quiet when I go to these events. I make sure that people know that I'm there, and that needs to happen more often. How? I have no idea, but you know, I mean, that's one of the reasons why I started the Visual Journalists of Color Facebook group, because we need to have a space where people know that we are there. Like you had mentioned before that there's lack of women who are photographers of color, and I'm like, yeah, I know, like I could call up about like 50 or 30 of them right now. And they're there. They're around, but
Layla is here.
yeah. Raise your hand, Layla.
Boom.
So yeah, I mean, they're there. They're around. You just got to find them.
All right.
But it starts with the work, right?
I mean, but the work, their work is out there, you know, and they put the work out there. Like, I mean, since we're talking about Layla, she has amazing work from Senegal that she's been trying to put out. And what did they keep telling her? Oh no, like, you know, we you know, this is okay.
But I can point out hundreds of white female photographers in Africa working right now, getting their stuff published regularly. Women, I didn't say men, women.
Yeah, but that's because the women have worked, like you were saying, that over the 100 years, people have put in the time to stand on the shoulders
have
of
done the
giants.
same too. Black women, I mean, Deb Willis has been pushing our stories, and I don't think she has gotten half the recognition as other white women doing the same thing that she's doing.
I mean,
Fact.
there are no institutions in this country that aren't founded based on white privilege and an industry or an institution for white people done by white people. And to say that that legacy doesn't exist in photojournalism is foolhardy. And so if we acknowledge what's going on here, then maybe we can take steps to change. We can talk about it. I'm not in a position of to say like, okay, well, here's what I'll do. You know what I'm saying? We're all grinding to make this work, but we need to understand that we need to understand the position of the industry. We can't sit here and say that we're exempt from any other the parameters that every other institution in America is. But it also comes down to who can afford to tell stories right now. with the amount of money that comes in when you're publishing stories, and the day rates and the things that are coming. I mean, who can really honestly afford to do this kind of work that isn't a passion piece, that isn't and they aren't making their money from somewhere else, and that seriously affects who's going to be telling the stories also. I
mean, I tell the stories, and I do it broke. I don't eat at times so I can go out and work. I mean, when I was working on the Black Farmers work, I wasn't eating at times just so I have enough money to rent cars to go out and drive 4 hours to photograph. You know, like, I sacrifice my life to go out and tell these stories because I'm passionate about it. This is what I want to do.
But we can't rely on everyone being as crazy as you. That's what I'm trying to say. If I were to tell Tavares right now, graduate from college, stay broke, and tell stories that matter, he'd laugh at me. And that's the reality of it.
So that's why I'm so glad that you four are on this panel, because I think sensitivity comes from heart, it comes from passion, it comes from having some kind of internal drive to tell the world something that you really care about. I have no idea how we're doing on time. Are we like way over, or are we good? Are there any questions?
Thank you so much. Ruddy, is that?
Ruddy.
Ruddy.
Yes, sir.
You had said a crack in the door, your children. I've been a teaching artist. I have a little video on YouTube with a 5-year-old Dominican descent kid say, "No adults left behind." And 5-year-olds are able to talk about life with more understanding than adults. So it's all, where is the crack in the door? How can it come? Just want to get your reaction to this. Nobody said, where can you make progress? Early childhood education, that it starts, that to say the child is the father of the man, the emperor's new clothes. When you see these 5-year-olds who are able to put the basics of life together, people should, get along together, help each other, stop fighting, be friends, We had this. So when you hear this, that maybe the priority should be on early childhood education, so kids are raised from the beginning, and then the child is clear that the parent, the adult, has to be responsible. You're not going to say the 5-year-old is lying to your face. But when you hear this, is there any way that you might be able to, like, express to me how I might, or you might take a positive step in asserting that early childhood education should be the #1 priority, as people have said, and start it where the new generation is growing and developing instead of waiting to the end? Thank you.
I could approach it so many ways. First of all, you have to surround yourself with everybody. I mean, I've known Tina Feinberg for about 10 years. And we have invested in each other's life. I mean, I have not called Tina as often as she has called me. But this has been important for me, because I cannot go around this world going black, 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 black. I mean, hearing a white woman's point of view in my life changes the color of my blood. Secondly, I'll give you a quick story. Every day, as long as I'm in New York, I play football with my sons. We play at Camel Park in Adelphi. And this is also a learning time for all three of us. I remember one evening we're playing ball, and a white family, actually 3 families with 2 nannies, walked across and sat down in where we were playing. And my son walks over to me and he goes, "Dad, is that okay?" And I go, first of all, it's a park. It's welcome to everybody. And so what we did was we found a little corner, we played, and when everything was done, we were about to leave, I looked over and I reached over to the father and I called him. And I said, "I'm going to point out something that you just taught my son. You just taught my son how to be invisible, because you brought your family over here without even acknowledging him and saying to him, first, good afternoon, this is who we are, what's your name, blah, 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 da, da, da." You said nothing. And then what you just taught your son was how to make us invisible. And that's all I said. And he immediately apologized. He immediately called his son from wherever they were, called the family, reached over and was like, "Let's start this over again." Introduced each other, blah, 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 blah. 2 days later, same scenario. Guess what he did? He was all the way over there. He walked all the way over to me, introduced himself. His kids said hello to my kids, and that's how the story starts. I don't expect that evolution, again, I'm going to say it, is going to be tomorrow. But I think if you and I start to lay the foundation and lay the groundwork, one day of the future, somebody's going to crack that door and go, shit, work.
I would say your son will crack the door.
And that's why we do the work. That's evolution. I mean, again, Moses did not get to the promised land. Joshua did. I don't have to get there. That's why I do the work.
They're already there.
That's why I do the work.
And to go a bit off topic, you mentioned about programs for kids. The government spends over $50,000 to house inmates, and about close to almost $10,000 for kids to go to school. That's the problem right there. That's how we make change and progress. You know, Ruddy talked about school books and what goes into books. I mean, there you go. I mean, things need to be changed. I mean, it doesn't just start from us. It's also just, you know, policies that need to happen.
Any photographers in the room with other questions?
Any questions, anybody?
Layla, ask a question. I'm calling people out.
Okay. Well, thank you everyone so much. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you, Robert and the Photo Brigade. Thank you, Adorama. And I think Robert has some more something
Well, yeah,
fun.
everyone, please thank the audience. Give them a round of applause. Thank you so much. It was a really great talk. Make sure to subscribe to our YouTube page. Follow us on Facebook, and to everybody that's watching on Facebook, we'll see you all later. Take care.
And download the ViewFind app.
Download the ViewFind app.